Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. Many thanks to the ASAE Research Foundation for hosting this session and supporting research. This event and every event during the Research for Impact Month is brought to us by the great work of the ASAE Research Foundation. If you haven't checked out the latest initiatives from the foundation that the foundation's been up to, I suggest you visit the Impact Everyday section. It showcases some amazing case studies and the impact that associations have on their industries. Members count on associations to represent their interests to the government, the public, and key stakeholders, but trust in institutions across sectors is falling. How do leaders build confidence in their organizations and the fields they serve, especially when faced with public distrust or uncertainty? This discussion today will highlight stories from association leaders who have used evidence-based communication in advocacy initiatives, public media campaigns, and other message-driven efforts to advance broader understanding of their mission and their members' roles in supporting society. The panelists will describe how they've used research to create attention-grabbing messages that demonstrate impact and build trust. They'll show critical skills and lessons learned that all associations can use to support their work. So thank you for joining us. By the end of today's event, we hope you'll come away with how to create credibility with the media, board, and members when using external research and data, learn how to validate your findings through your organizational lens, create a wow factor in publicity with your research and data, leverage new data to attract new member segments, and how you can increase the perception of value for your association's work. I'm Ben Rome, the Senior Manager of Communications for AIHA, an association serving industrial hygiene and occupational and environmental health and safety science professionals. I've been in the association space for over 10 years, and I've had more than 25 years in the writing and communications field in various industries. In 2020, we as an organization relied primarily on evidence-based research to fuel both internal and external communications to handle two very big challenges, and we did so successfully, so I'm happy to be here as a facilitator for today's discussion. Now, joining me today is Jevin West, Associate Professor and Director, Center for an Informed Public at the Information School, University of Washington, Magdalena Mook, CEO, International Coaching Federation, and Jonathan Lovitz, Impact Everyday Case Study Participant and Senior Vice President, National LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. And we're going to break this session into 4 topic areas: data and research as a foundation for evidence-based communication, leveraging internally driven derived data to strengthen your organization, utilizing outside research to support your members and drive social change, and then we're going to put it all together to establish your organization's position. So as we discuss our topic today, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A area of the chat, and hopefully we'll have time to answer your queries. So without further ado, let's get started. So we'll start with Jevin first. Jevin, please tell us, why is data important, and why is it a critical component of information that associations must consider?
Well, most of my time, day and night, in my teaching efforts and in my research efforts is all around data. Actually, I was hired at the University of Washington, a long time ago, and one of my first charges was developing curriculum around this emerging area of data science, where data was becoming sort of the fuel for decision making across all industries. And so we developed a lot of, with my colleagues, I formed a lab. It's called the Data Lab. I now have a center devoted to stopping the spread of misinformation, which many times comes in the form of data. But in that time, I found that students and the public more broadly were almost giving too much deference to data as well, just because as more data, as we became more attuned to all the data that was out there to make decisions, to inform the ways in which we make policies, that it was there was a need also to push back a little bit on it. And so I have a book about this called Calling BS: The Art of Skepticism in a Data-Driven Age, and in that we talk about ways in which you can spot it and call it out and sort of put some restraints and some reins on that data. So, but I do that mainly, for consumers, but also for the producers, those individuals and companies and governments that want to use data. Do it, absolutely, because most of the time I spend in science, science is one of those institutions that has been relentlessly empirical and uses data as almost its true brand and how it's been so successful. So there's no reason why other companies or companies and organizations shouldn't be using that. But we also have to do that cautiously, because as much as data can improve trust, it can also cause distrust. And as many of you have seen over the last year or so, many surveys and research projects have come out showing that the public actually trusts executives and leaders more so than their politicians. And there's an opportunity here to continue to build that trust through data, which has, it has lots of value. But I just want to keep putting out a cautionary note that as much as data can help you push a message, you have to make sure that you're not falling victim to selection bias issues, manipulation of data graphics, mixing up correlation causation, making, overly stating claims that are unfair comparisons, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We could talk about in detail, but the point is, data, if science is our model here, has been a great way of making progress, and we can do that within our different organizations, but do it with care, because you can actually make the problem worse if you make the mistakes that we all make. And so I'll stop there and just say, yes, data is great, but we have to be a little cautious too.
So for those of us who are not statisticians or research analysts or anything that super involved, what to the layman is the actual capability of data, especially in today's data-driven society?
Well, I mean, you see it in the pandemic, for example. More and more charts are being used in our Facebook posts and Twitter feeds. You see it in all the newspapers, online. You see this statistic, this percentage. You see, this Bonferroni correction, this multilinear regression. Those things can get scary, and there's a black box that all data essentially goes into. And you don't need a PhD in statistics or in computer science or any related quantitative field to be able to identify some of the major problems that might occur, or also identify the ways in which you can be extra careful when making claims using data. So things like selection bias. For example, there was a claim during the pandemic that dentists in New Jersey were seeing a higher incidence of dental caries and major dental problems relative to regular check-ins. And so their claim was that masks were problematic, and they had all sorts of reasons for explaining why. And there were all the analysis that was done really didn't mean anything, because they made a big mistake, which was sort of selection bias 101, which is that who in a pandemic is going to go for a regular checkup. But at the same time, if you have something wrong with your tooth that you can't even think, you're going to show up at the dentist. So you're going to see higher frequency relative to those check-ins. So I'm just giving one quick example. Selection bias actually is one way, without having an advanced degree in statistics or analysis. And so you can learn all the different ways to look for that. There's also some different ways in which percentages themselves can be problematic. So, I kind of keep saying it all the time that data really does carry a lot of authority. People think, the public does view it with deference a lot of times, that it's very replicable. It seems sciencey. It seems objective. It's almost like it comes directly from nature, or it's even divine. And so you can use that to your advantage, hopefully in good ways, but just be extra careful when presenting, because because if you are called out, then you've kind of lost the advantage that you had.
So how does an organization get the right data out there to inform the public?
Well, it depends on what kind of data you're going to put out. And I know we're going to have some good examples from others on the panel today, but I think, one of the ways in which we communicate with data is through data graphics. And I know that sounds pretty obvious, but there's lots of ways in which data graphics can be misused. I'll give you an example. So when Tim Cook took over for Apple not too long ago, he was put in front of on that stage where they're talking to all the excited employees and people that work for Apple, and the news writers that are going to write about the new Apple products. And he had this cumulative graph of explosive growth of the iPhones, and was talking about that explosive growth. But with any cumulative plot, for example, they always go up. And so he was called out for saying, well, why were you showing a cumulative plot? Why don't you show me quarterly sales? And we might be able to trust, your arguments or your claims about iPhone sales. And so that was an example that's been a common mistake we've seen in the pandemic too. We saw this coming out of the White House and other agencies, sometimes by honest mistake, because you can make mistakes with data graphics. But that's one thing, making sure that you're not violating what we call the principle of proportional link when using bar graphs, making sure that you're using fair comparisons when you're using heat maps, any sort of visualization, those can be the most effective. I mean, we have people in our department that spend their entire career studying the ways in which information visualization, especially data visualization, can be effective and tell stories and be incredibly powerful, more powerful than words. They can be worth more than 1,000 words. Well, a video can, or they can be more than 1,000 words. And so those are things that there's a bunch of rules that we can all follow. So I would encourage all the leaders out there that want to use data graphics to tell story to make sure you at least don't fall for the obvious traps that, again, we can all succumb to. But I would say data graphics, the ways in which you present, line graphs, data graphs, and how you do it really is to be as we always say, is any data graphic needs to be standalone. That you want all the necessary context, but no more. I mean, it's easier said than done.
Great. Okay, thanks, Devin. So we'll go to Magdalena now. Let's turn to address the strength of internally gathered data and how it can impact our organization in various ways. Now, I know you have a great example of how data can change a profession and an industry. Could you share your experience?
Sure. So, as we started growing as an organization, ICF exists since 1995, so still fairly young organization and a fairly young profession for professional coaches. So as we started making our strategic plans and started helping our own members, we started asking ourselves a question: do we know it or do we think we know it? Well, very quickly it became apparent that sometimes the perception or preference, frankly, could color the opinion that somebody would have, and ultimately a decision for the good of the entire organization. So quite early on, we made the decision of being knowledge-based, or as we recently started using the term, very much to Javin's point about interpretation of data, data-informed. Because again, just the data on its own may suggest something, and only in a larger context, you can make a right decision. So, for example, we conduct a lot of research around the state of the professional coaching, and then we started looking at this data, saying, how can we help our own members make better decisions about their business, make better decisions about their positioning, marketing, outreach, so that that research can really be very useful in their day-to-day operations. Let me give you an example. Our research indicated that in the first 3 years, coaches typically struggle. They do. They don't have as many clients. They may not realize level of revenue that is observed coming year 3 and after. So we looked into a little bit deeper into the research, and we also made a comparison to any other individual coming to a profession. So the first 3 years are tough for any small business, right? So we said, okay, it's true. It's true for other professions. Let's say that. We also had this data to see, and after you survive your 3 years, you're really gonna observe something very different happening for you. And also here are the tips how you can present yourself in a different light, if you will, in a whole marketplace.
So how difficult was it to set up your own internal research study?
So, we do research on our own membership, especially now when we have 45,000 of members in 140 plus countries. That's a very nice sample, if you will, for us to play. So we ask our members about their opinions. We ask our members about what they need. Again, do we know or do we think we know? Once a year, we do the study on the professional development needs. We ask them point blank, and again, having members in so many different countries, we are able to segment our membership in a different way to be most responsive to what's needed at the given time. We just this past year, we launched our new brand. That was a very interesting question for our own internal team. It's like, to what extent we're going to ask the input, but at the same time, how can we not ask the input if we are to represent our own organization? So it was kind of help us, help you type of thing. Strong brand, of course, is helping our members to get hired and to be employed. So we ask them to help us create that strong brand that reflected the values of the organization.
Okay. So based on your experience through this process, how can organizations use data for internal review and strength awareness?
Most definitely. This is, and again, back to Javin's point, we have to analyze the data. We have to take the data in the context of how they were collected and how they are to be used. Data informed, again, data informed. But this is such a huge value for the organization to have the data, to be able to show the data, and also to show our members that because of the data we have, the decisions being made on their behalf are really not just somebody's opinion or not somebody's bias, perhaps, but that they are truly representative of what we hear from our members that they need and want.
And so would you say that data is a strong component of increasing an association's impact, both internally and externally?
You know, I quite don't know how you can do it without data. Reason being that you can be called on it, right? So it's good to have that background information. But seriously, the larger we become as the organization, the larger the spend. That's really something that we have the obligation, in my opinion, and a fiduciary responsibility to utilize the resources that are finite in a very best way to deliver on the promise that our brand and our organization is giving to the clients, to our members, but also to clients they serve.
And how do you know that you were successful in building trust with your members using that data?
One, you know, kind of cliche, but we are growing leaps and bounds. We are welcoming over 1,000 members a month these days. We also know that more and more when people think professional coaching, they think ICF. And we ask also all our new members joining us, we ask them, why did you join our organization? And I actually received the results for March this morning, and top reason for years now is because we want to be a member of the most credible professional organization. And data is helping us building that credibility internally and externally with internal research and external research that we do with the third-party research organizations.
And you have a dedicated research, data and research team in your organization, correct?
Yes, you know, when I first started with ICF over 15 years ago, there was like research wet. We had part-time membership person, let alone research. But yes, right now we actually have a research team that primarily focuses on market research, and also a research team that looks into science of coaching, bringing credibility to the profession and the organization at the same time.
Wow. Okay, great. Thank you, Magdalena. So we'll move over to Jonathan now. So Jonathan, let's talk a little bit about how data gathered outside your organization can be utilized to further social cause. So can you share a bit how the NGLCC used external research data to affect change in the social narrative of the organization?
Thanks, Ben, and thanks to everyone for joining us. Really excited to be here with you. Data Nerds Unite. It's exciting to have a call like this and talk amongst peers. So welcome, everybody, especially on a Friday. Yeah, so the NGLCC, which is the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, and for anyone out there unfamiliar, we are the LGBT equivalent to a WeBank or an NMSDC or any other organization out there that specializes in certifying and elevating minority-owned businesses owned by women, people of color, et cetera, et cetera. We are in the LGBTQ space. And we were answering a question that a lot of people didn't think could be answered. And that was coming to us from government, from corporate America, from the public saying, why don't we know the same economic data about LGBTQ people that we know about everyone else? And it's a combination of laws and practices that the law does not yet recognize LGBTQ Americans as fully equal, and we're not a protected class that gets tracked and studied by the SBA or the Commerce Department, et cetera. Yes, I know it's 2021 and that is still shocking to a lot of people, but more on that to come. All we ever knew was why, and I'm sure anyone who's ever seen this in gone shopping in June, a lot of your favorite products seem to get a rainbow on them, but there's 364 days that aren't Pride Sunday, or at least 11 months that aren't Pride Month. And the LGBT community is a massive force in the economy that has never been tracked and studied. So we used all of the information that we had in certifying these businesses that are 51% or more LGBT owned. They share tax returns, they share financial data, employment data, all of these things that you normally give to governments or other partners that work in this space, but is not out there in our community for a whole lot of reasons, not the least of which being safety. We aggregated that data, studied it, analyzed it, broke it down into snackable categories. To Jevin's point, made sure we had a handy dandy infographic that could fit in a Twitter window. And it really changed the entire dynamic conversation on the issue. We went from people only thinking about consumer power and why, you know, your Listerine bottle and your American airline tail fin turned rainbow to, wow, 1.5 million LGBT business owners add $1.7 trillion to the US economy. If queer Americans who own businesses were their own country, they'd be the 10th wealthiest in the world. And yet 35 states in the country still say it's perfectly legal for a bank owner to say, we don't give money to your kind, which any of us who work with business owners know is the number one thing we all need is access to capital. So whether it was completely revitalizing the supplier diversity space to recognize that you know, inclusion in economics means beyond just race and gender. It should mean sexual orientation identity and gender identity. It should mean ability and disability. It should be veteran status. It should be more than what we all grew up knowing if we're going to really talk about inclusion. And we use that to frame issues like marriage equality or getting out the vote, or, you know, I'm sure all of us are hearing about the transgender bills that are popping up all over the country. Why are they all dying in every state? Because the business community is saying you will be economically punished the way North Carolina, Indiana, Texas, other states have been, and they come to NGLCC for that data to prove why. Equality is good for business, and now we can back it up with data.
Wow. So curiously, so the information that you collected as an organization, you know, through the tax returns and all that stuff that you guys are already collecting, how did you go about the process of parsing that data down? Did you hire an external team? Was that something that you hired internally? Is that something that's continuing to move forward? How does that work for you guys?
Yes, and so we have an incredible team at the organization whose day in, day out job is to be, you know, knee deep into all of that paperwork, and they know how to parse it. And then we worked with a data aggregation firm, people who know how to do these kinds of surveys and studies. We worked with one called Whittick Communications, which many of you might have seen if you've ever, especially in June when there's a lot of coverage on this topic. Every year they release the pink dollar that LGBTQ people spend as consumers. In America right now, it's about $917 billion. And that has always been used to influence the marketplace. You know, not all chicken nuggets taste the same. Some taste like they hate you. So why would you spend your money there? So we have conversations like that all the time. And now we can back it up even further with the economic data on input back to the economy, especially in places like, you know, where that data can be used and segmented, right? Not just to say it's a national picture, but we can now break it down by geography and say, i.e., you know, Indiana or Texas or North Carolina, in one of these states that's had a bill that we've helped beat back with the economic case for equality, say, look, this is who it's going to affect. These are the number of jobs created in your district or your state, and this is what the impact is projected to be. And what's always amazing to remind people, especially in an LGBTQ context, you're always rounding down because everything is an estimation, because it's relying on self-reported data, or now in our case, you know, aggregated verified data on the community. But everything has to be ratioed at scale because we are not tracked by our own government. So we're making best guesses here. So even that $1.7 trillion figure is probably down from what it really is. And it also points to such an important topic that I think all of us are hearing in data collection, and those especially who work in the economic data space, is intersectionality. Because LGBTQ people are women, are people of color, are veterans, are immigrants, we are, this is data that can be broken down and then re-expanded out to help make decisions and policies and economic reform in every other community.
That's great. So, I mean, obviously, one of the ways that the data you provide helps your constituents is through public policy. But what are other avenues that you've seen that data that you've collected and put out there? What other ways have you seen your constituents use it to better their businesses?
Well, especially when you're dealing with a diverse and historically marginalized community, visibility is power.
Right.
Visibility is that stepping stone to equity. So what we are doing, one of the great things that the report did, not only in showing the numbers and the case, you know, where they come from, the industries we're in, it provided one of my favorite sections is a snapshot of several different business owners from several different walks of life in the addendum. And we've continued to add more to that to our online page, telling their story about, you know, where they were as a business owner before getting certified and after, and what it meant to be a part of a community that is now being recognized economically on the American and the world stage. How, you know, we as an organization, the NGLCC is turning 20 next year. They went from one corporate partner 20 years ago with IBM saying, yeah, we'll consider working with LGBT businesses in our supply chain, to now we just passed 310. And my work in the public sector is to take that same rationale for, you know, more diversity creates more innovation, creates more, you know, a better supply base that lowers prices, all of those good things that people care about, and apply it to government spending and saying, look, you're missing out on job creation and small business innovation by not including this community in your public sector spending. So we're not only moving policy, but we're moving entire industries forward. You know, of course, anyone who's followed sort of the progress of inclusion in private sector has seen that you know, the financial services, travel and tourism, they were already there first for women, for people of color, for LGBTQ people, because they followed the money. But this report showed how much impact was being missed and how much potential collaboration to finding new business was out there in places like that were not historically LGBTQ friendly, or at least open to expanding their definition of minority. Construction, defense, law, all of these places have now vastly expanded how they work with the community. And that's created so much more opportunity for small businesses all over the country to showcase themselves. I mean, I'll tell one very quick illustration of that, which is, you know, just last year, a trans woman-owned construction company in Illinois signed a $20 million build project with one of the nation's largest construction companies. I could not have said that sentence 5 years ago because the construction company wasn't looking for them. The contractor wasn't out and visible in the marketplace because they didn't think it was safe to be. Well, look where we are today. Because of our report, we're shattering the myths about what kinds of industries we're in. And even, we're all talking on Zoom, which is a network that has all kinds of encryption and protection software on it. One of our nation's top national defense contractors is a pair of lesbian-owned data scientists who have a data protection company that was never invited to participate in RFPs with the Defense Department until they realized 10% of the population as businesses were not engaging.
So you just pretty much read my mind and answered the question I was going to ask, which was, how do you know if you've been successful in building trust using the data that your organization provides? And of course, you just gave us some really great examples. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, and I'll tell you too, it's, more gets more, right? I think we all know that, and whether it's the infographic that drives traffic to your site, creating conversations where people can see, role models, and as I like to say, opportunity models. More is more is more. And particularly with this study, one of the great things it did was help facilitate conversations about equality and opportunity and intersectionality in the other diverse business communities by intentionally calling out and using the data to show, or, the myth, shattering the myth that, let's say, all LGBT-owned businesses are cisgendered gay white men from the, Washington, New York, LA, DC, all of that. And then saying, actually, what the numbers show us are we've got a tremendous amount of, queer women of color opening businesses in the deep South, despite the odds, all of these things that say, do not believe the monolithic stereotypes. We are anything but that. And that is prime for investment, prime for contracting, prime for more data study in these industries that had never been approached to include this kind of information before.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So in a moment, we're going to open the floor to the panel and talk about using research and data to establish organizations' market position, as well as how you can leverage your members to shine a light on effective use of that research. But I'm going to start by sharing how AIHA did both of those things last year in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, to execute two very important member and public-facing priorities. So last year, our organization's leadership, both our senior leadership team and our board of directors, quickly identified an avenue of opportunity as COVID-19 really began to unfold back in February, March. As our members were being identified in public policy spaces as essential frontline workers, because the profession is centered on health and safety in workplaces and communities, we challenged our volunteer groups to access ongoing research with our partners and allies and government agencies about the virus, about safety protocols, and we challenged them to develop some guideline standards centered around returning to work, because we were already starting to see, mass closures and shutdowns. So because our members serve a wide variety of industry, these volunteers worked up to what ended up being 26 or 27 different industry-specific guidelines that's based on available standards, practices, and ongoing evidence-based research from our partners, our allies, our government agencies that we work with to help businesses know how to provide the safe spaces for people to return to, including places like nail salons and gyms and restaurants, places of worship, construction sites, and a whole bunch more. So we quickly leveraged all that information into a website, backtoworksafely.org, and our media outreach, which has now seen more than 1 million downloads of guidelines, over 6 million additional unique visitors to our website, and numerous requests for expert interviews and media availability. So this really pushed our organization, and more important, the profession that our members are in, very prominently into the public space. So that work is still going. Our guidelines are constantly updated frequently as new research is pushed out. So we haven't stopped to rest on that. That's a continuing process. This is because our volunteers are dedicate their time and expertise to maintain these guides, because they fully believe in what they do for the public good. And we as an organization continue to serve our mission mandate, which is healthier workplaces, healthier world. So that's how we used external research that's available to us from outside entities to leverage and affect change for public good in the space that our members are a part of. So last year also, we launched our rebranding campaign. This whole look is new as of June of last year, but contrary to what people might think, this campaign actually took 5 years from inception to execution, because so this was not a spur of the moment reactionary event to everything that was happening. We spent a lot of those previous 5 years conducting focus groups after focus groups after focus groups. We did member surveys, we did outside surveys, we professional surveys. We discussed, with various board iterations and our members, and did market research and a whole lot of things. It was a very time and consuming and long involved process to gather the information that we needed to make the decisions that were necessary for our rebranding. This whole rebranding was to refresh our look and our feel, our mission and our vision, redefining what the professional parameters are that we serve. And really, it also is to increase our desire to be a public resource for workplace health and safety issues, not just our current member-focused education outlet for certification. So that's the military, so just ignore that. They're not coming for me, I swear. So one could say that the 2020 launch last year was horrible in the middle of a pandemic, or it could have been fortuitous. Depends on how you look at it. It could have been horrible because we had an elaborate launch campaign centered around our annual conference in June, which then got moved to a virtual platform. So about 90% of our planning got scrapped into the bin, and we had to adjust to accommodate. But I actually see it as a fortunate event. I tend to look for silver linings, and if the pandemic did us any one favor, it was showing our new look, our new image, our vision, and our dedication to workplace and community welfare at exactly the time that we need it the most. We rolled out all of our guidelines at the exact same time. So when we hit the ground with that, we had a new look, we had a redefined vision, we had full engagement and a buy-in from our members. They were super pumped to embrace not just the current crisis, but also embrace the more public view that was looking back at us. So, member reaction was positive, public reaction was positive, and we've continued to build on that momentum. So that's how we've used internally, research data for the rebranding, and external data coming in from all of our partner sources to execute two very important positionings last year to a lot of success. So I'm going to stop talking now because I need a breath, and we'll go to Jevin for a second. So can you share an example of when you've used evidence-based communication to advance a broader understanding of your organization's mission and member roles?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example. So before the 2020 US election, we partnered with Stanford University and various other labs to monitor misinformation specifically around the election, not about whether Trump said this or Biden said this, but to provide evidence of posts that were going viral on various different social media platforms, to talk about where we were seeing procedural interference, participation interference, delegitimization, et cetera. And what we found is that in that very politically charged environment, we had to be extra careful in our center in making sure that we presented our arguments with well-backed data. We had to be able to allow reporters and others to be able to trace exactly back to even the data row in which certain data was coming from. And we had press conferences on a weekly basis with, sometimes up to 30 journalists from around the world or around the nation showing up to those events. So we had to make sure we got the data right on that, because most of our conclusions were based on large data sets that we collect on a daily basis. We're collecting tens of millions of posts all the time, tracking at large scale, at these macro scales, viral events that are occurring on social media, but also then digging down to specific events like Sharpiegate or other things that we were seeing during that time. And that particular kind of activity requires a very careful attention to using data to sort of make arguments and claims. But that's just one of many different kinds of projects that we're doing. Like another one, we're monitoring misinformation around vaccine hesitancy. We spend most of our time actually in the health misinformation space, and some with politics. But when doing that, we have to be careful to provide links to our data sources. If we have code that we've written to write up the actual graphs, it's actually a trend that's been happening in science for a long time. We create the environment where anyone, even journalists, even the public, can actually run our analysis and see that. They can do it themselves And so it's addressing some of the problems we have even had in science, some people call the reproducibility crisis. And the real solution to that is creating methods and environments to make it as easy as possible for anyone to trace steps back to how you made those conclusions. But in the simplest form, we are, making claims based on these empirical observations. We then have to do some analysis, some highlighting, some condensing of that analysis. Those then land in infographics and in web pages that do have a lot of the basic descriptive statistics that you see. But in doing that, if done in a way that's careful, you can engender trust that way. And it also gives you your own confidence, because here's the thing, it's not just about gaining confidence externally and trust externally. It's very much internally too, to make sure that you're doing sanity checks. And so we should be making decisions on data, but also data that's reliable. So it's both for outside and internal efforts, and building that confidence.
Okay, great, thank you. Magdalena, so I want to turn to you really quick. How would you suggest to organizations how do you suggest they gain or gather internal support for making these evidence-based decisions that are going to be important?
It's a really good question, because doing research is an investment. There is no question about it. It could be investment of time. It often is an investment of resources, otherwise financial included. So I think that gaining from the experience of some other organizations might be a really good thing to do. Listen to Jonathan, and you want to start doing research tomorrow, actually this afternoon. But really building on this experience is important. We in our organization, because we started doing research good 15 years ago, we have now a trend builder, right? We can see how the industry is changing. Let me use the example of COVID, where we anecdotally, this is always difficult, right? When you say anecdotally, and we say, okay, so anecdotally we hear that coaches are not coaching. Let's check. 10,000 responses later, we found that actually the industry is doing fine. And we even repeated that survey just to make sure that there was not some blip on a radar just for a certain period of time. So we can show the trend, and we can also show that way the value for the membership. Whenever we started changing or using the data to help our members do better in their business, that was a specific value added that the research offered to our members. And again, that credibility, that's something that is tremendous. So know what your members need, and then give it to them with the credible data behind it.
Great. And Jonathan, I'll throw this to you. So through your experience so far over the last 5 years, what critical skills and techniques should associations use to leverage the evidence and data to help support their work when they're developing communication strategy?
Video wins in all instances, at least in my experience, and particularly when you're dealing with things that have a direct impact on people's success or livelihood. In our case, hearing them talk about and we did an entire video series of this, what it meant to be validated by data. We all knew these things to be true about our community, but now we've got the backup. And being able to contextualize it in, especially as you've heard a couple people say, for the audiences outside your particular zeitgeist in the work that you do, getting it to the opposition, getting it to the change makers in the industries that don't work with the kind of data you use, makes them reevaluate how they think about things. In our case, we talk about things like, the average American small business dies around the 5-year mark. Our survey showed, our report data showed that the average LGBT-owned business is 12 years or older, which allowed us to have all these conversations with places like Inc. and Entrepreneur and the Wall Street Journal about what makes diverse owned businesses so much stronger, which then let them contextualize Black owned, women owned, disability owned, veteran owned businesses into the same conversation, which then began bringing in new partners for us that never thought about collaborating on shared goals and shared missions. So video carries a lot of weight, infographics carry a ton of weight, and then coming up with ways for people to then take your information and say, well, what about you? This is what we know about us, but we only know what we know because we were able to survey this many people. Help us help you build an entire ecosystem of data. And that's what I was saying before about it allowed us to create these great new solid partnerships with people like, the US Black Chamber of Commerce, who said we've historically had some issues getting LGBTQ people who are also Black to feel comfortable in business, bringing their whole selves to their business the way we encourage people to bring their whole selves to their workplace. How can we leverage this data to make people realize our own community is poised for better greatness if we step up levels of understanding and inclusivity, et cetera. So, let the data help you open doors. And if it doesn't, build your own door with it and say, all are welcome to take it, run with it, and build on it.
So we have a question, and it's typically the one that I see comes up every time I do a panel, which is, it's relevant. So I'm just going to throw this out there for any of you guys to answer. So many associations are small with very limited budgets. What's the range of costs in instituting a respectful research operation for smaller and mid-sized associations? Is it more likely that a smaller association is going to need to outsource this function, and how much do they kind of plan on that?
Well, I guess the technical response is it depends. And why I'm saying that is because it depends, of course, on the scope and size of the research that you want to conduct. It may depend on the difficulty of gathering the data. As I said, we do a lot of research within our own organization, so at least we have an immediate access to the database, and people typically respond because it's a friendly question coming from their own organization. Our first research with PricewaterhouseCoopers, we did it, as I said, 15 years ago. We didn't have a lot of money, and it was a question of finding the partner who was intrigued by then just new profession, that they were like, okay, let us see what we can do. And this partnership with PwC continues to this day. We do a lot of different surveys with them. So they already were a very credible, of course, partner in a research field. And we continue walking hand in hand in us providing the access and then providing great independent information for us. So I think that collecting great information and doing great research does not have to be expensive. Mm-hmm. It does require good thinking about constructing that first survey, right? But again, it could be outsourced. It could be also, as I said, at ICF, we did not used to have a dedicated function for research. Now we do, and I think that on a daily basis, we keep them busy.
I think that's actually a great point, because look for a partner who might be interested in the kinds of data that you might be able to pull from your members, because we all have different member bases. I mean, there's different cross sections all across the board that we have access to that might intrigue a larger research firm that might look at doing a partnership with a better fees or whatever that might be involved in, may actually give you better data, because if they're interested in finding out that type of information or similar, mm-hmm. They may actually work out a longer partnership with you. And that's actually a really good point.
And a shout out to, Make Academia Great Again, because we found so much help in getting the word out and parsing and then, syndicating the data. I mean, we found out so many people are citing our information in MBA projects and things like, so we worked with a couple of universities to help get this out because we knew they could use it. And they turned around and said, next time you're doing this, let us be your research partner. We have people who want to do this for a living, who would love to say they had their hands in a big national research project like this. So, as you're shopping around for partners, think about the people you can help us help you in the mindset of working together to cut the costs or make them as close to free as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to end on. Unfortunately, we're coming up on our time, so that's sadly, we've got to cut the conversation short. I want to thank each of our panelists today for being here, sharing your experiences. It's truly a tremendous amount of information and knowledge base that we get from all of you. You're welcome, as the audience, you're welcome to stalk all of us on LinkedIn and connect with us. Our thanks to you for being in the audience and listening and tuning in on a Friday afternoon when we're all ready for the weekend. We're glad that you chose to be here before you decided to kick off your time. So please look at all the other ASCE Foundation virtual panel discussions on the website for more great topics, and I do wish you a fantastic day.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.